Great. I see people trickling in. Thank you everyone for joining. We have people trickling in, so we'll give them another minute or so for everybody to fill up. We have a pretty full house today, so hoping to get a lot of exciting chats going here. Hmm. All right, we have a good number of people who've already joined, so we can honestly just maybe get started. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sandra. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. It's Friday. I'm in LA. It is quite beautiful outside, so I'm excited to get this chat going, wrap up my day, and maybe go on a run. Should be a fun time.
Same here. I'm in Palo Alto, and the weather is just beautiful. These
I
last few years, few weeks.
I visited you, and it was, San Francisco weather is always just it betrays me. I join, it's warm, it's beautiful for a little bit, and then there's this fog. I think it's named Carl the Fog, and the Carl the Fog joins, and everything gets cold, and you didn't think you need a jacket, and then all of a sudden you're freezing. It's a whole ordeal. So feeling very blessed right now. But hopefully everybody else is joining in from somewhere awesome, wherever you are. I do believe we have a ton of people from the UK, so it's end of the day. Hopefully you're hanging out with a pint of beer and are able to kind of hear the journey here. So for everybody, my name is Tristan. I'll go ahead and jump onto this next slide here. I'll be the moderator for today. And, before we kind of jump into my background, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about our guest, Aleksandra. She goes by Sandra, and she is one of I don't even have enough words to describe how you lead, but with empathy, integrity, incredible tech knowledge. And, excited to introduce her. She is joining Google again as the Director of Robotics Research. She has a PhD in computer science, IEEE Fellow, IEEE Robotics Automation Society Career Awards, multiple best papers. All of the PhDs and high level clients that we meet are somewhat familiar with your work, and it's pretty incredible. And her work has also been featured in New York Times, Economist, Forbes. I mean, the entire gamut. And so, with that, I'll also introduce her and let her give a quick brief overview of her background as well. So, go ahead, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Tristan. Very humbling. Just a small correction, not robotics research, but director of research scientist working on the agents, but not
Former,
robotics
actually,
research.
I should have, yes.
I didn't catch that before. So, okay, brief intro just to kind of give you guys background. The bit of the longer intro. So I'm originally from Serbia, did my undergrad in math and computer science in University of Belgrade there. During the 90s, which was not the happiest time for the country at the time. So basically the moment I graduated 2 weeks later, I immigrated to the US. Moved to Michigan. Spent 6, 7 years in Michigan working
Mhm.
as a software engineer for developing software for automating factory floors and manufacturing because that was the business in automotive area in Detroit area. While I was working towards the end, I wanted to go to grad school, could not afford it, and so on, being a fresh immigrant and so on. So a few years later, I enrolled and did my master's at the UC at software engineering. Partially because my undergrad was more theoretical computer science, computable theory, and math and so on. I wanted to actually learn how to build software.
Yeah.
And I did my master's while working full time, so we can kind of talk
Wow.
about the work-life balance and all the 9 yards in that sense. And after my master's, I moved to Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Spent about 9, 10 years there working on remote sensing systems. So satellite ground stations, seismic sensors, and whatnot. And during that time, Sandia had a program that allowed people to pursue PhDs. So I did my PhD at University of New Mexico. While I was at Sandia, having some time off there, and then after, and my PhD was in reinforcement learning and robotics, computer science. And then after returning back to Sandia for a year, Google recruited me. What was chauffeur project was Waymo now for the self-driving car planning team. So I joined Google 10 years ago. Spent 2 years at Waymo on their planning team, introduced machine learning in that space. Then moved to robotics in Google Brain, spent a couple of years there working on robot navigation. Then moved to the brain reinforcement learning. Went through the GDM integration. Then after the integration, wanted to kind of figure out what was kind of how to make sense of the new research in the state of the research in the LLMs and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I left Google about a year ago, to join Genesis Molecular AI, led their AI efforts there, set up the research agenda and whatnot, got the roadmap. And now I transitioned that role into advisory role, and I'm rejoining Google on Monday, actually, to work on
Congratulations.
AI
And
for health agents, not
for,
robotics.
makes total sense. I mean, given your success at Genesis to kind of go towards that direction, I think people
Yeah,
do believe health will be a major category. And I'm excited for you and also grateful that we were able to catch you towards the last bit of your break before you start on Monday. So thank you again for making the time.
absolutely.
So my name is Tristan Tao. I am a partner at Rora. I do want to give a quick view so you know who I am. I was most recently the founder and CEO of a company called HyperArc. We were building business intelligence software plus artificial intelligence. We have about a dozen patents in that area. Prior to that, I was running solutions engineering at a marketing automation company called Iterable. Prior to that, I was actually a co-founder of a YC Summer 15 batch. So this is actually, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been a decade now, Sandra. And I was fortunate enough where the founder of Rora was actually my co-founder back then, and we've gone through kind of a spiritual growth together. Beyond that, since Sandra has such an incredible academic record, I figured I'll list the only record I have, which is a double major in undergrad as computer science and statistics at UC Berkeley. And then the last thing that I think is just so humbling when I talk to you is you were doing a master's, you were working full time, you were figuring out your life. And, my mom actually was doing the same thing. And I saw firsthand how difficult that transition was being an immigrant, being a woman in a very male dominated space. Her degree is also in computer science. And there's a funny story there where I promised her that I would get a PhD. And I have still yet to do so, unfortunately. I still have time, I believe. But, that window is starting to close. So it's definitely something I think a lot about. To
You
be
never say never. You never know.
Never say never. I think so too. But the catch is, I was 12 years old when I promised her. And I think she took advantage of my lack of understanding of how difficult it is to get a PhD. And again, I know there are a lot of people in the audience who are either wrapping up their PhD, getting started, or half finished. And again, congratulations to everybody there. So, with that context, I do want to talk very briefly a little bit about what Rora does, who we are, and then we can kind of jump into the conversation here. So a little bit about the Aurora Career Agency. If you're showing up to this webinar, you're probably somewhat familiar with what we do, and most people are familiar with kind of the bottom pillar, which is the Aurora Recruiting Service. And this service has also evolved beyond just negotiation, where we started out by helping PhD students get a job in the industry. And now we actually do a full service offering where we help you with sourcing, we help you with mock interviews, both behavioral as well as technical. And our interviewers are actually industry veterans, meaning they work at companies that you're probably familiar with, companies that you're trying to get into. They're actually the hiring managers. From there, we've kind of branched out based on demand to do coaching, where once we help you land a job, there's a little bit of how do I become successful at the job? And we provide coaching in terms of how do you talk to your manager? How do you find the right project? How do you move up in the company? From there, we were also opportunistically pulled into representing a small group of top AI researchers. These are people who have their names on the most famous papers that you can imagine. And for those people, we work with them on speaking engagements, VC advisory, pretty much whatever they want to do with their career. And the entire point of why we exist is building a career of consequence takes a lot of effort. When you look at Taylor Swift and her success, it's obviously her raw talent. That's what everybody coming here today has. But behind her is an entire army of people who are making everything happen. And we want to be that group of people for all AI researchers. And just right off the bat, we've worked with 1,500 plus people. More than half of our referrals actually, or our customers come from referrals. So people use us, they love it, and they come back and they tell their friends and family about what we're doing, and we get more customers that way. And we've negotiated over $1 billion in salary since our inception. And we put that number is already outdated, but several $100 million back in the pockets of our customers. And the most key thing is we have a model where if you don't like the outcome, you don't have to pay us. That's how confident we are. And having run this model of we could do all this stuff for you and you don't have to pay us, and we've been doing it for 1,500 people, and total number of people who opt to not pay us is less than 1%. And so we're very confident about what we do and how we're able to help early, mid-career, late career AI researchers be successful at whatever endeavors they have. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share and get into the actual fun part of this Q&A. Oh, this is much better, Sandra. Now that I can see you face to face, I was staring at a screen and I kept looking to the left because that's where you were, and it felt weird. So happy to be able to have this discussion. I mean,
Yeah.
I first met you again being introduced by Brian, the founder of Rora, and we were, one of the questions we kept getting with the people we placed is how do I make this transition, right? Academia is very different than industry. And you were kind enough to spend a couple of hours in Palo Alto or Burlingame, somewhere in South Bay at a bakery. And your story was just so humbling. So I would love to maybe revisit some of the things we talked about
Absolutely.
and kind of hear more about your journey as well as transitioning into the industry and what's happening over there. So with that, I mean, let's get started. What I'm most curious about is how did you get into AI research, right? You had an early career that wasn't as linear as undergrad, master, PhD industry. It was all over the place, and you ended up somewhere incredible. Tell us about that.
So as I mentioned in the intro, I did not start as the AI researcher. That was not graduating from undergrad and so on. This was 98, just before the dot-com burst. There was no option of kind of thinking, or AI really wasn't on my radar. It was somewhere there. It's like, okay, AI exists. It's a possibly curious thing to do and so on, but not really in the realm of the things I was able to do or explore
Mm,
further on.
of course.
So fast forward to once I was in the labs, the conditions were like, okay, yeah, maybe this time we had just had a major launch of the project and so on. It was a good time to kind of take a step back on the career. My kids at the time were 6 and 3 years old. So okay, that first phase of the craziness
Oh my gosh.
with the kids, like the stars starting aligning. Labs had a program that would allow to actually pay for the degree and give you some time off, actually 2 years off. So then I was questioning, okay, how do you do PhD with 2 years off and so on? And third year was partial and so on. So it required some kind of lining, but finally, at that time, I was in a position that I was 37 at the time. And I was like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, back to Tristan, to you, your promise you're gonna do it. I still have 20, 30 years of career ahead of me. If it's gonna happen now, it's time to happen. So let's just kind of go in and plunge and do it. So, and that's when, okay, if I'm gonna go do PhD, what I want to do is like AI is something that I'm interested in. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the AI, kind of being exposed in the realm of the projects that I was in. There was lots of vision. I was working on the perception at the time for certain things, some planning and control without machine learning and so on. So anyway, it's like, yes, I'm gonna do a PhD in machine learning because it's cool. I have no idea what I'm gonna do. It was actually the first day of my, once I enrolled and then I have the new student orientation and whatnot, and different professors come in and kind of tell you what they're working on. And my would-be advisor said, oh, and my research is in making teaching robots how to behave well.
Fair.
And I'm like, this actually sounds really cool. The and what she meant by that was basically planning and reinforcement learning and sequential decision making and so on. It's like that is actually really interesting because it kind of cuts into the understanding how maybe we as humans think and behave
Wow.
and whatnot. Whereas like the vision and perception is like, okay, you just kind of tell me what, but you don't do actually anything with. Anyway, so something clicked there. So that's how I reached out to her, which added more. And that's how I got into the reinforcement learning and AI
Ve-
research.
Very, very exciting. I mean, teaching robots how to behave well is such a funny concept. There's also a philosophical element of what does it mean to behave well. I want to double click on that another time just because I'm interested. But what I do want to know is, now that you're got doing your PhD, you're getting into this interesting industry. How did you transition kind of into your first role and a little bit more towards the industry side?
The after the PhD or
Yes, after the
yeah.
PhD.
So
Or
one thing, yeah, go
if
ahead.
you have context for what you were doing during the PhD, whether that's
Yeah.
side projects, whatever, that would also be potentially helpful.
So one thing that without the well, PhD teaches you two things. Teaches you your a little area of the expertise, basically what PhD is certification that you made a little progress in a tiny little area
Fair.
of the field. You did something new. So you kind of again you're the world experts in the tiny thing. That's one thing that PhD does. The second thing that PhD does is teaches you how to take unsolved, previously unknown problem and do something useful with it. And that's a
Yeah.
transferable skill, right? So from that perspective, once you kind of graduate, this allows you, if you stay in your area of the expertise, this allows you to say, hey, this is not my expertise, not my problem. No, not quite in that, but
That's
basically
fair.
this it kind of gives you a license where with masters you kind of need to be a jack of all trades.
Yep.
You need to kind of stay up with the newest tool. There is my well, then now we're going through, seems like there is a new coding environment coming up twice a week about
Oh yeah.
the and so on. So we kind of focus. Masters requires you to be and keep up as being a generalist, master
Yeah.
of all trades, so jack of all trades, master of none.
Yep.
Whereas having a PhD allows you to really focus and say, hey, this is my area, this is where I have something to contribute, and this is the boundary. I don't need to know. It kind of gives a peace of mind
Yes.
to a certain extent. So from that perspective, kind of returning back to the labs was a correct question. Okay, I have this skill set. Where do I make it most useful for the labs? The or kind of society, right, and whatnot. So rejoining, I started actually working with a seismologist on applying reinforcement learning for detecting seismic events, earthquakes, and so on, be looking at the sensory network. So we got the funding for that research. Also joined a spiking network,
Okay.
spiking neural nets research, because this was also a combination of neuroscience and reinforcement learning. So can we try to combine it and whatnot? Basically, you come in and say, okay, the skill set that I have and the knowledge and kind of where you want to push the field in that direction, where is the overlap to the environment that you're in?
Very, very nice. And thank you for explaining it a little more. As someone who doesn't have a PhD, it's helpful. I think some of the words are making sense, others less. And so you ended up doing some of these projects. How did you kind of end up in your first blue chip role, for example, right? That first role where you were really proud of.
Well, there's lots of stuff that I've done in the labs that I'm really proud of. I can't talk about
Oh,
it.
the first one, let's say, into the industry
Yeah, but
specifically. Yeah.
Waymo was exciting. Because in Google and Waymo reached out to me and like, yeah, this actually makes sense. It's a robot. We're kind of used to think, well, nowadays things changed. 10, 15 years ago, we were thinking robots is more kind of traditional style. It's like, yeah, autonomous car is a robot.
Yeah.
It's an autonomous robot working in real world on the real streets. and whatnot, and actually has potential to do good for the society. Yes, it's convenient, but it also, more importantly, saves lives because driving is more safe and also enables people that cannot normally drive to have a sense of independence, right?
Yes.
So kind of strikes two things that when I'm kind of thinking now, where is it important to kind of put the efforts and push the needle is that does it enable us as a humankind, as a society, right? Is there a group of people that this really kind of improves the quality of life as a technology? And that kind of goes the safety, right? And the enablement are coming to that mind. So yeah, Waymo was not on my mind when they reached out. Again, this makes a lot of sense, and yeah, let's kind of go in and jump in with that. The It was a few months after I joined that we had Steve, a blind person, being fully by himself in a car driving in Austin, Texas. And he said it
Wow.
was first time for him in a years to be alone in a car. It was very empowering. But I
Wow.
remember us watching this and like,
Pray for Steve. Yes.
yeah, but that
It's
was cool. Yeah,
really, really interesting because, I do have friends with PhDs and a lot of the work they do is very academic oriented. And to kind of have that going into industry, it's about driving impact and
yeah,
actually deploying it and actually having people use it. And there's a big difference between kind of the theoretical side of a benchmark versus it's in the road and the lives of people are dependent on it.
yeah,
It's a huge transition
yeah, yeah,
as you were kind of making that transition from or really entering a place where it was critical that whatever you were building worked incredibly well. I'm curious if you had kind of challenges you faced or things you had to unlearn even from doing research at the PhD level that really ultimately made it so that you were able to succeed.
So one thing that, again, if we look at what's your advisor's, PhD advisor's job? Their job is to teach you the mechanics of how you do research, right? And the mechanics of how you do research, it's a trade, right? Every trade has its own tools and ways to do this. Write the paper, do a lit search, right? Run the experiments, put a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, so on. And their job is to really put you through the training. This is why it's a training.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you need to do every step of the way by yourself. If you're training to be a baker, you need to start making some pastries and cakes and bread or whatever it is that you're doing, right, by yourself and so on. That's what PhD is. It's an individual sport.
Yes.
Move on to the industry, right? You don't need to do everything by yourself. And in fact, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's a team sport, especially if you start building something larger. And by the way, this is what we're seeing now that the field is generally shifting with the LLMs. Gone are the days where you can have one person own the model, get the data, and so on. Now it's really like full engineering project. You need to start looking at basically what your niche are. And there is advantage to that. It's like, I really don't enjoy writing.
That's
and,
fair.
and I've had a number of collaborators that absolutely love writing. Great, let's work together.
Yes.
I love doing analysis personally.
Yeah.
I love looking at the data, kind of putting the hypothesis, testing, trying to find understanding and so on. I'll take that pretty much at any time and so on. So I think that mind shift from individual sport to team sport is really important to kind of get the from transitioning to the job.
We hear this all the time. It's a sudden realization that you're in a lab with, a computer and you're just looking at your screen and you're talking to advisor sometimes and you're kind of working on this life project. And I think it makes sense in the context of a PhD, but in an industry where you have to deploy something again at scale, it is just that
Yeah.
teamwork. It's a system. I would
Yeah.
be curious about kind of the personal traits that you think is really valuable as you make that transition, right? And we're talking a lot about kind of the EQ type of thing. I'm wondering from your experience, what's the personal trait that you kind of consistently see with researchers who ultimately become impactful and rise above within an organization?
Well, when people that struggle to do that, it's not, there are sometimes because it's hard to make, maybe you think in the team, there is also a good portion of people that feel that if I delegate something or if I rely to do something, I'm somehow cheating the system. I'm not working hard.
Mm,
I'm not working hard enough.
yeah.
So there is that piece as well that when I'm talking to kind of people now, allowing yourself to actually go and get into the teamwork mindset is important. The for the traits, I guess software traits, ability to take a feedback, I think it's a
Mm,
very important one.
yep.
The because we can assume that everybody comes technically competent, like with a strong engineering skills, strong analytical skills, and so on. The curiosity is important. The and I'd also say maybe intellectual agility, being
Mm.
able to kind of shift the perspective, look at the problem from another perspective, from a different point of view. That's kind of good both for teamwork and for the technical work as well.
Intellectual agility is an interesting concept because it does have multiple facets in terms of is my idea wrong? I'm kind of just changing my emotional state that okay, maybe I am wrong. And then there's also the industry is just moving so quickly. As you mentioned, new models are popping up all the time.
Yeah.
Wh- how can somebody like double down on that? It's hard to, for example, keep track of all of the different things that are happening. And we also hear this from are some of our clients where they join a lab and so many things are happening. People are doing things over here, over there. It's hard to keep track and it almost becomes important to do so. How do you enhance that agility?
Well, you don't try to keep up with everything because you can. I mean, at least I can. Maybe there are some people that can. I can't. The and this might not be necessarily popular, at least the way I'm thinking about the staying. I mean, have your sources, do your reading, right? Do all the 9 yards. But understanding what is your unique point of view
Hmm.
to the research is very important. And maybe even more so important than in other times or kind of more when it things settling and so on.
Yes.
The From my perspective, again, this is I'm focused on agents in real world. The So I'll always look at what are the things that are basically standard blockers in on enabling agents for real world application. That application can be robotics, can be web agents, can be drug discovery, right, and so on. So what are the unique things there? And at least I found a lot of mileage in focusing on the metrics, the new ways to kind of measure the success, because we're all preconditioned on measuring the performance. What's your accuracy of that?
Yes.
However, that accuracy never comes alone, and when it gets to really deployment of the agents, you really need to look at the cost and efficiency in kind of more comprehensive way. How efficient or how costly is your data that you're training? Are you training from expensive human experts or from the cheap simulated or Gen
Hmm.
AI generated data? That changes the equation of how easy it is to build these systems.
Yes.
The how safety is always, when it gets to the real world, you always have some kind of flavor of the safety on or comfort. If it's drug discovery, that might be actually the collisions of the atoms and whatnot, or the toxicity, right, and so on. In robotics, it's very obvious autonomous driving, like collisions, right? Or
Yes.
uncomfortable driving. But there is a flavor of that that you always need then to balance this triangle of performance, efficiency, and resilience and go from there. So if you have your point of view, then, and you have the conviction that the problem you're solving is a worthy and you're kind of bringing something new, then I mean, there's always going to be lots of churn on what other people are doing and so on. But like,
It's interesting here about the POV, and it kind of explains why this is difficult, right? You have to have an opinion and you have to have conviction, but you also have to know when you are wrong and when your
yeah,
team wants to
yeah.
go in a different direction, being able to navigate that while ensuring that everybody's working together, the relationship's good, doing maybe you're doing the research you don't want to do. There are little things there, and I think seems like all of those elements are important to be successful as a
But
researcher.
that's what research is about, right?
Yes.
You have your hypothesis, you get the data, and when the data tells you something wrong, you pivot.
Hopefully you pivot. Yes. Actually, we were getting deeper into the industry, and I want to go down the train as well. But we had a question from Mingtran that I really liked, which is kind of, you mentioned getting recruited by Google to kind of work on their, you called it the chauffeur service. What a funny name. And I think Mingtran was curious about what were the projects? Why do you think what got you on the radar of Google or Waymo in terms of them saying, hey, you could be a great fit?
That's a good question. At that point I don't think I had my website or anything. I think they just Sourcer found me on LinkedIn.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that was the extent of it. I did get a award for PhD thesis, so maybe that was kind of part of there was some PR going around that. But yeah, I never asked actually. That's a good question.
Well, I will tell the audience, we'll find out for you if you work with us. I think we have understanding of how recruiters and companies, what they look for in terms of your visibility, your research. And again, one things we observe when it comes to looking at academia is there's so much honor there. It's about doing the hard work and your work will speak for themselves versus one thing people realize once they transition towards industry is there's a little bit more fluff that goes on with it, right? You do have to try to win people over for your idea because your idea won't speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely right about that.
And so, yeah, no, this is really interesting. I do think I'm very curious about what the recruiter saw in you very early on. Everybody's wondering like what happened there, but I'm glad. Hopefully, we can find out one day what that is. But now it's obvious. Now people see your background and they definitely want to just grab you. Um, Another question I had is around kind of networking. It's actually maybe tied a little bit into what Mintran was asking. What is a great way to kind of network within industry, right? The senior researchers. How do you get to know some of these people?
The it's always good thing to be a bit strategic about that. And this took me maybe a little too late in my career to get to that point, but okay, that's why I'm here talking to do that sooner. Understand really who your sponsors are. And
Hmm.
for people that don't know who and what sponsors are, they're different from know your mentors. Mentors are people that can kind of help you teach you skill A or skill B. This is how I should do this, and so on. Sponsors are people that are more senior to you, that are sitting in the meetings and they're sitting there and saying, hey, I think the person A should be good for this job. They can
Hmm.
nominate you for different things and they can advocate on your behalf and so on. So understand who your sponsors are. There is a lot more about sponsorship, Tristan. I'm sure you can talk a lot more than I can about that. But have your basically your personal board of directors, if you wish. That group can be, I don't know, 5, 10 people, however, and then make sure that you stay in touch with them. The Put a calendar every 3 months, 6 months, however makes sense. Write an update. Hey, this is what I've done, how things going, and so on. If somebody gave you an advice and you took it and that was useful and helpful, send them an email, tell them this was useful. People love that.
Yes.
They don't hear that often.
No, yes.
But that's a really good way to kind of stay in somebody's radar. Yeah,
The theme I'm hearing is, I heard a couple of things here. One is kind of understanding organizational structure within a company, right? It's a little bit more rigid, but knowing the priorities of kind of your sponsor, your manager, the director. And on the other hand, it's about remaining human and continuing to connect with people. It's actually something we do for kind of our agency clients. They're in a new city. I say, hey, there's four people who helped you. You met them at the conference. Go have coffee with them. And you have to prioritize these things. I think when we were building our first company at YC, that it's funny because we also heard you need to build your personal board of directors, right? And it's not the CEOs of this and that. It's a mix of people who you want to become more like. That's kind of how
yeah.
I've taken it. Yeah.
But but first, kind of my personal for first time I kind of got a sense of that was during the 2001 dot com burst back in the day, few
Yeah.
years out of school, when basically one company I worked for went under, second company I worked went under, third company had the layoffs, and then there were layoffs and so on. And what ended up happening is, I mean, there was lots of turbulence, which kind of where we're there now, is that same people were kind of basically hiring me again. So
Yeah.
things kind of explode. More senior people, my bosses or kind of boss's boss and whatnot, will kind of start a new thing or kind of find a job and then say, hey, how about you join and so on. And that was like, okay, yeah, I guess people stay together.
Yeah.
The projects and companies and so on change in a way, but these people connections stay for a long time.
That's incredible. We have noticed that PhDs tend to move in flocks, if that makes sense. When we were looking at kind of our customer base, we found seven people from Sergey Levine's lab, and we're like, oh man, they're in a little pod, and they end up in a similar company. So what I'm hearing is ensuring you're staying close to your people. It is that human aspect that's really important. And no, it's a
Yeah.
great
And,
take.
and that's maybe even more pronounced in research than in your standard software development engineering job,
Yep.
because research brings by its nature a lot of uncertainty. And with the uncertainty comes anxiety.
Mm.
And the trust becomes that much more important. So kind of having the trusty friends that you can exchange freely ideas and so on, and they know how you take. PhD is usually very stressful. They know how you react under stress, you know how they react under stress, right? They want to give you a space and so on. That's all super important. And it takes a lot of effort and energy and time to build that.
And it's an investment. It's
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah,
something you
yeah,
can just draw from. There are times that people need help, and it's about giving.
yeah,
And yeah, and it takes faith that you'll receive. But for me,
yeah,
having helped people, it always pays off to help people.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it was a really good question here, which is around how do you kind of find that board of director? How do you build your village?
The well, you start talking to people. You start basically looking who is in your sphere of interest. That might be. If you don't have anybody, how to kind of get them. Good question is, and I've done that a lot actually earlier on in career when I say, hey, maybe I'd like to learn more from this person. I kind of get too close to them, go in and say, hey, I have time. Do you have any project or something that I can help with?
Mm,
It's very helpful to basically offer time
yeah.
and effort, and then do something useful for them, and that way they become your advocate.
And so what I'm hearing is it's not necessarily going to people and say, help me, and instead it's actually trying to help first. And
Yeah, yeah, we reach out. I've done that a number of times. Like, hey, I really like what you're doing here. If there is anything for me that I can be helpful here, let me know. And then we'll be like, well, I'm working on this initiative, so maybe you can kind of spend or whatever.
exactly. And you can potentially spend a little time. You might know someone else. It is just kind of building that village
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the question. It's a great one. There's another one that I do want to maybe touch on before we kind of get back to original talk track, which is, what makes a good sponsor good? Is it power? Is it pedigree? Like yeah, how do you judge that yourself?
The I guess look maybe the best way to look at is how well more junior people around them are progressing.
Mm,
Look at the track record from that perspective. And this goes for the advisors, for PhD advisors, for bosses, for anywhere else. The So I think that's like look for the evidence of impact.
that's that's such a hack. If you and if you know there's a director somewhere that's producing a lot of superstars, you want to be a part of that journey. This also, I think, feeds into your point about that network, right? If you are under that sponsor and the other people in that group is really becoming stars, you are able to be a part of that. It makes you better and you're building great
Yeah.
relationship with that great cohort of people. So that makes a lot of sense. There was a wow, questions are starting to really pop in, so I'm trying to keep track of all the different things. And this is kind of relevant. There's a question. This is for a person with only a master's degree, but PhD level research experience with real impact. I think her this person's question is around how do you break into kind of industry nonprofit. I think maybe you can talk a little bit more about research around master's versus PhD and kind of the impact around the different types of research you can do, and then we can kind of double click on the next part.
So can you do and become a researcher, whatever quote unquote researcher means, without actually getting a formal PhD? Absolutely, you can.
Mm,
The only things There are two areas where you really need a degree. If you're going for academic job, you need to have a formal
of
degree,
course.
yeah, before kind of getting professorship and so on. And the second one is, I'll say it, if you're potentially a minority and so on, having the official degree kind of gives you additional stamp of approval,
Yeah.
so to speak, or certification. For all other matters, you don't necessarily need to do, and the line is very blurry between what is a research, right, and what is. And again, I want to separate the academic research, which can be done in industry, academia, and so on, which means, okay, we do something new and we publish a paper and the paper comes out of that. There is also a lot of applied industry research, which is a lot of innovation and
Mm,
the startups and so on are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And in order to push the boundary of what's possible, you need to basically put a hypothesis, find what basically your unique angle of attack is, put several hypotheses, solve the problem, and so on. That's research. And you can absolutely, and the paper one might not come out of that. What you might get is a patent potentially. You'll build the technology, there are the levels of maturation and so on. And you can absolutely do that. And there's tons of people that are doing that with a master's degree and so on. So the
okay.
question is what particular person enjoys, where they find the personal satisfaction, right? And so on.
That is really, really interesting. I mean, speaking of personal satisfaction, one thing I've been really humbled and fortunate enough to be able to do is to kind of rise up in a company and go into management. There was a question that was relevant to that, which is kind of as you've gone from IC to manager to director, how has your day-to-day changed, right? Are you still in tune with the low-level details? Tell us a little bit more about, she's shaking her head. Tell us a little bit more about what that transitions look like.
I wish. I was writing some code recently. It was fun. So as an IC, your or more kind of at the junior level. Well, let me know kind of. There is the IC, there is a technical lead, and then there is a manager, and these two kind of overlap. As an IC, you're writing code, you're running experiments directly, you're basically putting the experimental plan and whatnot. So there's a lot of hands-on short term, short term, quarter to 2 quarter things happening. Is a TL, which is maybe the next kind of ladder, whether you're managing or not managing, your job is then to basically oversee or guide a group of individual ICs and make sure that that group does something more cohesively
Mm.
together, right? So if person A is interested in running certain experiments or kind of proving some hypothesis and so on, where is the other, how that is all going together? That might be as small as, and I'm going to use a unit of paper. Academic paper is a nice unit. I think
Yeah.
lots of people understand, but it doesn't need to be a paper. Basically, having one person that oversees the whole thing, understands different pieces, and so on. As you start kind of going from there, you start basically automating yourself from the job and kind of leave more of these day-to-day experimental run decisions to the individual ICs, and you start kind of thinking more and ask questions like, okay, if they're successful, what is then that needs to be done? And that kind of goes in two ways. A, who can use this technology?
Mhm.
So you almost need to start pre-market. You need to
Yes.
be optimistic
Yes.
that the things are going to work, but then you also need to kind of start laying in the groundwork for the impact. So, oh, maybe Tristan, you're interested in what we're building, and we're going to have it done in a month or so, and so on. And maybe we start kind of talking about building. If this is kind of more blog post, and let's kind of maybe do a tutorial, whatever it might be. So start kind of thinking that be one step ahead from where the team is. And that allows you that if things are going wrong, with the project that's going on, you can step back and use your time to actually help with the project, right? As an extra set of hands or kind of more coordination and so on, but then you kind of additionally start looking forward. Then beyond that, you start looking, okay, what are the new areas that we should be tackling on
Mm.
that are not being tackled? At that point, you're probably having several teams that are working on certain things, but then there are big giant holes. Now you start kind of herding cats on like, well, this is important, and here is why, and here is how we impact. So how do I solve this? Where do I get the resources? Do I convince these three people that this is interesting? Do I get new funding for it? Where do I get compute? And you start kind of basically setting up the seed for the new projects and so on. At that point, you're usually kind of already into a management because navigating people careers and what they're working on starts becoming very intertwined with the technical side.
I'm hearing a lot of orchestration and optimization, right? You're kind of, again, one unit is what you're focused on as you're doing a PhD. Once you get into industry and once you start managing, a lot of units are flowing. So much of that is interpersonal. What I find it most interesting about your background, Sandra, is having done some of the IC work, it doesn't necessarily help you in management. There's a saying in this is more maybe just SaaS, but best ICs don't always make the best manager just because the skill set is so different.
Yeah,
And how did you learn what those other skill set was? I mean, this is definitely not something they teach you in school. This is the thing that's never talked about in school versus in an industry becomes absolutely critical. How did you pick up on these soft skills?
that's interesting because one thing that I really learned in Google is I consider myself a decent software engineer until I joined Google, and it's like there are some senior like L7, L8 ICs that are writing code. It's like I don't know how you do it. So it's like okay, that's that. But I think understanding, you need to ask yourself like really what is that you care about? What makes you happy? Where do you feel most fulfilled contributing and so on? For me personally, and things change over time. For me personally, I remember that was it was maybe 20 years ago or so on. I asked my manager at the time why she decided to be a manager. And she's like, I enjoy watching people grow and helping them grow. And I'm like, well, that's odd.
Oh no.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
But now I'm really excited about that and so on. I find personal satisfaction in that and so on. So things change over time.
There's actually a question that I think almost unifies all of this, which is, when you work at a different company or they're outside of your circle, how do you get to know them and how do you get to offer to help? And when I think about that and management and a great leader, it is about just helping people. It's
Yeah,
that interpersonal dynamics. And honestly, great managers sometimes mentor people who are not on their team, right?
yeah,
It's about
yeah,
just expanding your reach and wanting to help.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I just wanted to call out kind of that parallel.
yeah. And there is the school of thought called servant leadership
Yes.
that for people that might not be familiar, Tristan, you can talk more about that, is basically that your job as a leader is to enable the team. And that's, I mean, in the broad scheme of things, that's the job. And you kind of go from there. And you're basically acting as a conduit between where is your from your technical perspective where you think the field should be shifting based on the context and so on, the company, where the field is, where the team is, and basically enabling that.
Amazing. I see more questions in there that I'm trying to orchestrate and navigate. I'm seeing some tactical questions around how do I network, basically. I think we'll run a separate session on that because there's a whole theory world of theory. So stay tuned for our future webinars. But I do want to, while I have you here, ask some additional questions. We got this one question from the audience ahead of time. Pranav, hopefully you're here. Thank you, Pranav, who's the VP of AI Research at JP Morgan. And he talks about, as AI agents increasingly automate parts of the research workflow, what should AI researchers do to stay competitive, right? You're seeing this in the junior software engineer level. I used Claude yesterday to scrape some data, took zero code. I just said some words and things are changing so quickly. How do you think kind of the results of AI research, which is intelligence, actually feed back into the research itself?
I think we're all kind of going through the change together. The one thing that's very exciting is that we're really seeing now real-time emergence of the new programming software engineering paradigm.
Mm,
The maybe the last paradigm was going from the procedural software engineering programming languages, C and so on, to the object-oriented, like remember like Java and
the
C,
oops.
C, C,
Yes.
C++. That was a big change, right? And so on.
Yep.
Now we're actually entering like with the anti-gravity and the cloud agents and so on. We're starting actually get the codified vibe agents for coding and so
Yes.
on. I mean, and if you kind of think of it from the perspective, what did object-oriented programming did for programming or moving to higher order languages over assembly, this is basically that type of change. And did the discipline survive? Yes.
It thrived, I would say. Yes. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. So how exactly is that going to pan out and so on remains to be seen. There is a trust that we have now in compilers that we don't need and go in and debug at the assembly level, right? The so I think we'll kind of get there. It's going to be messy and it's going to be buckle up for the ride, but we'll get there. The in terms of the research, again, I mentioned earlier that the beyond the performance, looking at the cost efficiency and resilience. I personally, this is my research approach, is that by diving in and understanding deeply an application space or two, helps me deeply understand where things can move the needle and where kind of lots of opportunities, unsolved things are. So from that perspective, LLMs, what do LLMs bring us? They bring us open-ended tasks because now we have language as an interface and code as an interface on the other hand. And with the generative AI and the world models and so on, and the self-improving ability, we're kind of creating this self-learning engine. Great. What do we do with that and how we improve it? Well, for one, on the pre-training and post-training, the whole training process is awfully inefficient and expensive.
Hmm.
There is tons of research that can be done and should be done there on the architecture, right, on the training methodology and so on to make this more efficient.
Yes.
data. Where are we getting the data? How are we getting the data? It's very empirical science at this point, and there is a lot more there to kind of put the foundations of the field. There's lots going to be work on the inference techniques.
Mhm.
How do we take the LLM, right, and adapt it to the applications in space? The on the application space, in the application space, there's tons of areas that AI is being, well, there's not much data for, or that AI still can be used. Social sciences,
Mm.
economy, the chemistry, biology, right? There is tons of space, there's tons of room for new research and ideas and so on. So I think this
They're
will
just
kind of may make the tooling is going to make the research accelerate, but there is still plenty of to do.
it's, when you talked about the compiler, it really resonated because in my undergrad, there's a class that's famous at Cal, and it's a compiler class taught by a notorious professor named Paul Newman Hilfinger. He was actually my favorite professor, one of the hardest professor. He would answer my code questions at 1 a.m. because there was no need for him to do that. So shout out to Paul, but he also taught a compiler class and it was optional. And I said, compilers already work. I don't want to dig into it. I'm gonna assume it works. And it's viewing AI as that paradigm shift in some way, I think is really interesting. The other thing that I kind of picked up on is pulling from the thread earlier around curiosity of all of these things are happening, being curious. Have you tried all of these tools and actually trying to make things work? I think that's the best way to get ahead of things. And so I know I want to be mindful of time. So there's one last question, which is kind of it's a generic one, but I love it, which is if you could give yourself one piece of advice, right? Something that you had wished you followed earlier. And if you think about people who are doing a PhD, recently wrapped, maybe getting to that first or second job, what would that advice be for you?
One piece of advice. The I think definitely I learned too late. Well, maybe I could have learned sooner the value of the network.
Mm,
The so I think that that's something that I would definitely. I graduated with my undergrad. I think I was fourth in the class to graduate and so on, but nobody knew. Like I'd show up to the exams, get my grades and so on. So there
mm,
was nobody to write a recommendation letter for me, which kind of then took me a while. So definitely kind of don't underestimate the network. The And maybe similar to that is that interesting problems are easier to find than good quality collaborators.
mm. There's a lot of emphasis on people and kind of your community and again, your advisory and your network. I think we definitely want to double click on that in a future session. And, again, what I want to comment on is every time I talk to you, there's a heavy emphasis on fulfillment and inner work and making people working with people, collaborating, helping people. And I'm again really humbled by kind of that mindset. I know you're joining Google, so I'll give a quick plug to people. I think Sandra will be able to lead a division if you want to join a company that is being ran or being led by someone with that mindset. It always helps, right? When that leader isn't just results, don't talk to your friends, and instead takes a step back and breathe and think about the fact that we're all humans and we all have to work together. We all have lives. I think that's absolutely wonderful. So shout out to Sandra and everybody think about applying there. I'm sure everybody already is. The last thing I want to do is kind of share a quick bit around where we're headed to next. I want to highlight the thing that Sandra talked about, which is networking. So you should take an opportunity to, reach out to Sandra. One of the questions is, how do you reach out to somebody who you don't have a connection to? Well, she spoke a bunch of things here today. If I pull on a theme of what she said of, hey, send a note about this was helpful. Maybe send her a note on LinkedIn saying this was helpful. And this is an opportunity. And when you are able to meet someone like Sandra who's open to connecting, open to helping, this is the time to activate. And we'll spend additional sessions in the future to maybe double click on how to do it effectively. We also have our own LinkedIn as well. So follow and add us. This is a great way to kind of connect with people and find mutual connections. And I also wanted to put a plug for our next webinar. We're going to do a bunch of these webinars that are a little bit different than our previous ones, which were how to get a job and instead a little bit more fun. So we're having Michael Ryu, who is co-authors of RT1 and RT2, very famous papers. And we're going to have him talk about motion world models for robot control. And we're going to have a moderator who is much smarter than I actually get into the details. And that'll be in 2 Fridays now. So feel free to come sign up. And then if you want to talk more about how do you network, if you have those individual questions, and we're happy to do a free consult with Rora. Again, our goal is to help people first, and then hopefully monetarily it works out, honestly. And so come talk to us. We would love to brainstorm with you on how to make your career successful as well. And so with that, I know we're up on time, Sandra. You're incredibly busy. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you for having me. It was great, and thanks everybody for coming.
Cheers. Thank
All
you.
right, bye.
Bye.